Jorah was a name spoken with fear, a whisper in the darkest corners of the galaxy. Her title was Jorah the Devourer, a creature so terrifying that entire civilizations had fallen before her. Her massive form, 10 feet tall, was covered in a skin that shimmered like dark crystal, casting eerie reflections in the dim lights of her prison. Her eyes were like two burning suns, fierce and unyielding, capable of tearing through any being who dared meet her gaze. She had been known to rip entire starships in half with the swipe of her claws and to destroy entire planets without a second thought. The Federation, fearful of the unimaginable destruction she could cause, locked her away in the most secure prison known to the galaxy, the Iron Gloom. It was a floating fortress meant for the most dangerous beings in the universe, a place where nightmares were confined to chains and shadows. Jorah had become a symbol of pure destruction, a force of nature that no one could hope to understand or control. The legends surrounding her were enough to make even the bravest shiver. Yet, there was one being who wasn't a scientist, soldier, or leader, someone who wasn't part of the high ranks of those who controlled the prison. Jace Rowan was simply a janitor. He wasn't special in any extraordinary way. He wasn't trained to handle dangerous creatures or to be part of the complex operations aboard the ship. He was, in the simplest terms, a maintenance worker. He was tasked with cleaning and fixing the parts of the ship that had been worn down by time and the weight of its purpose. But Jace, despite his lowly position, had been chosen to work aboard the Iron Gloom for reasons beyond his understanding. He had heard the rumors about Zora, of course, but he didn't share the deep fear that most of the crew had toward her. He hadn't yet seen the monster, not in person. He had only heard the whispers, the stories, and the warnings. When Jace first walked past the cell that held Zora, he couldn't ignore the aura of dread that lingered in the air. The guards stationed outside her cell were always on high alert, their hands tightly gripping their weapons as they kept a careful watch on her every movement. It was clear that Zora was a creature to be feared and avoided at all costs. But as Jace passed by, he couldn't help but glance at her. At first, he saw nothing but an imposing figure curled up in the back of her cell, her massive form barely fitting into the small, cramped space. She was silent, her eyes closed, her body still. Her presence radiated power, but there was an unsettling stillness to it, as though she were waiting for something. Jace didn't feel the immediate fear that everyone else seemed to experience when near her. Instead, something tugged at him. It was an odd sensation, a curiosity mixed with something else, something more complex than mere dread. Jorah's eyes snapped open the moment she felt Jace's gaze upon her. It was like a switch had been flipped, and the once calm beast was now alert, focused. The intensity of her gaze caught him off guard, sending a chill down his spine. Yet, it wasn't anger or violence that Jace saw in her eyes. For a brief moment, her expression softened, and in that fleeting glance, Jace could have sworn he saw something more than a monster. A glimpse of pain, of something deeply buried beneath the surface. The sight of it unsettled him. He quickly turned away, his heart racing, unsure of what he had just witnessed. Jace tried to push the feeling aside. She was a beast after all, something that had been created for destruction. She wasn't capable of anything else. He reminded himself of the stories, the countless whispers that painted her as a mindless killer, a creature born to destroy. Everyone on the ship was told the same thing. Don't look at her. Don't engage with her. Don't make eye contact. It was the most basic rule aboard the Iron Gloom, a rule everyone followed, even the highest-ranking officers. Jorah was the threat, the monster, and there was no reason to try to understand or feel sympathy for her. But despite the warnings, Jace couldn't shake the image of her eyes, the way they had seemed to hold something far more complex than what was expected. In the following days, Jace found himself working near Zora's cell more often than before. He didn't know why, but his footsteps always seemed to lead him closer to her. There was something about the quiet of the prison ship, the eerie silence that surrounded the beast, that drew him in. When he passed by, he noticed more details. Her black, crystal-like skin, which shimmered even in the low light, didn't seem as menacing as it had at first. She was simply lying there, her massive form curled up, as though she were trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable. It was strange. How could something so powerful appear so vulnerable? Jace's curiosity grew, and it was no longer just fear he felt when near her. It was a mix of compassion and a growing desire to understand the being that had been painted as nothing more than a monster. One day, he couldn't stop himself. He had to know more. He stood outside her cell, staring at the massive form within. Jorah was awake, her fiery eyes fixed on him once more. This time, however, she didn't look at him with the same intensity. There was no fury in her gaze. Instead, she simply watched him, as though waiting for something. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Jace, unable to resist any longer, spoke. "Why?" Jorah's gaze shifted, her massive head tilting slightly, as though she were trying to understand the question. "Why?" "What?" she asked, her voice deep and gravelly. "Why are you here?" Jace asked softly. Jorah's eyes seemed to darken, her expression shifting to something like sorrow. "I was born to destroy," she answered, her words carrying a weight that seemed to stretch across the void of space. "It is all I was ever meant to do. They made me this way." Jace could feel his heart aching as he listened. She had been created, forced into a role she had never chosen. Jorah was no mindless beast. She was a victim, just like anyone else who had been shaped by the cruel hand of fate. It was in that moment that Jace truly understood. She was not a monster, but a being shaped by forces far beyond her control. A being who had never been given the chance to be anything else. He took a step closer to the bars of her cell, not out of fear, but out of something else. A need to understand, to reach out to the soul beneath the surface. But before he could say anything more, the guards arrived, their heavy boots echoing down the hallway. Jorah's gaze hardened again, and Jace stepped back, feeling the weight of the moment slip away. As he left, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Jorah than anyone had realized. The fear others had for her was only part of the story. Beneath the surface, there was something deeper, something worth understanding. And for the first time, Jace felt that maybe, just maybe, he could help her find it. The days following Jace's first encounter with Jorah lingered in his mind like a haunting melody, one he couldn't quite escape. It wasn't just the image of her massive form or the heat of her intense eyes that troubled him. It was the conversation. Her words echoed in his thoughts, reverberating with a weight he wasn't prepared for. She had said she was born to destroy. That wasn't the voice of a monster. It was the voice of something. A someone. Who had been shaped, twisted by forces beyond its control. The realization hit him harder than anything he had ever encountered. Jorah wasn't a mindless killer. She wasn't just some force of nature created to destroy. She was a prisoner, just like the rest of the beings aboard the Iron Gloom. The next morning, Jace found himself back near her cell, more out of curiosity than duty. His role on the ship hadn't changed. He was still a janitor, still tasked with cleaning the various sections of the prison and maintaining the ship's systems. But his routine felt different now. Every step, every turn seemed to lead him closer to the heart of the mystery he had uncovered. The guards, as usual, stood watch outside Jorah's cell, their postures rigid, their eyes scanning the hallway, but they didn't notice him as he approached. He was just another worker, blending into the background, invisible to them. His heart raced, his palms sweaty as he paused near her cell. Her presence was suffocating, a dark cloud that hung over everything. Yet, instead of fear, Jace found himself drawn to it, drawn to her. Jorah's enormous form lay against the back wall of the cell. She was still, as she often was, her eyes closed, but there was something different today. The air around her felt heavier, as though she were waiting, anticipating something. Jace couldn't shake the feeling that she was aware of his presence, even without looking at him. The tension in the room seemed to stretch, to curl and coil, until he could almost feel it in his bones. After a few moments, her eyes snapped, open, catching him off guard. He wasn't sure why, but he had thought she would be oblivious, uninterested in him. Instead, her gaze locked onto him with an intensity that stole the air from his lungs. It wasn't the burning rage he had expected, nor was it the cold indifference of someone long resigned to their fate. Instead, it was something different. A quiet recognition. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence between them grew heavy, suffocating, until Jace couldn't stand it anymore. His throat felt tight as he opened his mouth, the words slipping out before he could think them through. What if you didn't have to destroy? Her gaze flickered for just a second, a small shift in her demeanor. Her massive head tilted slightly, and for the first time, Jace saw the faintest flicker of confusion cross her features. It was subtle, nearly imperceptible, but it was there. As though the concept was foreign to her, as though no one had ever asked her that question before. "I don't understand," Zora responded, her voice as deep and resonant as the hum of a distant storm, carrying a weight that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of the ship. "I was born for destruction. It is what I was made for." Jace felt a pang in his chest, a deep ache that seemed to expand with every word she spoke. "You were made for it, but that doesn't mean you have to. Keep doing it!" Jorah's eyes darkened, her expression hardening as though she were retreating into a place she couldn't allow herself to leave. "You don't understand," she murmured. "I don't have a choice. The galaxy fears me, and for good reason. I cannot escape what I am." Jace didn't step back, didn't waver. He could feel the weight of her words, the truth buried in the depths of her soul. "But maybe you're more than just what they've made you to be. Maybe—" "I am nothing else," Zora interrupted, her voice sharp, like the crack of thunder in the distance. The sound of it reverberated through the corridor, and Jace flinched slightly. "You don't know what I've done, what I've been made to do." Jace's heart sank, but he couldn't let go of the feeling that there was more to Zora than the galaxy's stories. He could feel it in his bones. "I know what they've told me," he said softly, "but I don't know the whole story. I think you're more than what they've made you to be." Jorah's eyes narrowed, and for a moment there was a flicker of something vulnerable, something raw in her gaze. She seemed almost hesitant, as though she were on the edge of something. But before Jace could say anything else, a harsh metallic clang sounded from the hallway, breaking the fragile moment they had shared. The guards arrived, their footsteps heavy and purposeful. Without a word, Jace stepped back, feeling the connection. They had started to form slip away like water through his fingers. The guards eyed him suspiciously as they took their post by her cell, and Jace quickly walked away, his thoughts swirling like a storm. He couldn't explain what had happened between them, but he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward Zora. There was something about her, something beyond the monstrous legend that the galaxy had crafted around her. It was as though she were trapped in a cycle she couldn't escape, a prisoner of her own nature. And for the first time, Jace felt a deep, gnawing desire to help her, if only she would let him. Days turned into weeks, and Jace found himself in the same routine. His job kept him busy, but his mind kept returning to Zora, her words, her eyes. He kept wondering if there was a way out for her, a way to break the chains of her past. He couldn't stop thinking about the one thing she had said. "I don't have a choice." But Jace knew better. Choices, after all, were what separated a monster from a soul, and he believed that Zora, despite everything, had a soul. He couldn't give up on that belief. Not now. Not when he had seen the hint of something more in her eyes. And so, he continued. Every day he found his steps leading him closer to her, his heart pulling him toward that dark cell that held the galaxy's most feared monster. Jorah's presence no longer seemed suffocating. Instead, it felt like a quiet invitation, one that beckoned him to look deeper, to understand more. Jace wasn't sure what he hoped to find, but he knew this. If anyone could help Zora find another path, it had to be him. For if no one else could see her as more than a weapon, as more than a monster, then maybe it was up to him to see the soul beneath. Jace couldn't stop thinking about Zora. Each time he passed the area where her cell was located, he found himself lingering, his mind occupied by thoughts of the massive alien and the strange connection he felt with her. The guards grew suspicious, noting his frequent visits and his prolonged pauses near the holding cells, but they said nothing. To them, Jace was just a janitor, a nobody. His presence was insignificant. But to Jace, it felt like he was slowly unraveling something far more significant than he could have ever imagined. Days passed, and Jace began to spend more time in the less frequented parts of the ship, hoping for another opportunity to speak with Zora. His heart longed for a deeper understanding of her, who she was beneath the monstrous exterior. He wasn't naive enough to ignore the danger she posed. She had been created for one purpose: to destroy. But even monsters had histories, and Jace couldn't accept that she was nothing more than the sum of her destructive actions. There had to be more to her, and he was determined to find it. One night, while the ship was deep within a remote part of the galaxy, an unexpected opportunity arose. The usual sounds of the ship, clanking machinery, the low hum of engines, were replaced by an eerie silence. Jace walked the empty hallways, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. He had just finished his shift and was heading toward the crew quarters when he spotted something out of place. The guards, who normally kept a strict watch on Zora's cell, were nowhere to be found. The hallway was empty, and the air around him was thick with tension. Jace's instincts screamed at him to leave, to retreat before he was caught out of place. But a strange, overwhelming curiosity kept him rooted to the spot. He wasn't sure what had happened, but it felt like his chance had finally arrived. With quick, quiet steps, Jace made his way to Zora's cell. The heavy metal door was locked, as always, but a faint light slipped through the edges of the door frame. It wasn't the normal glow of artificial lighting. It was different. Flickering, almost like the pulse of a dying star. Jace hesitated for a moment, wondering if he should step back, but something inside him urged him forward. This was the moment he had been waiting for. His heart raced as he reached the door. He gently pressed his hand to the cool surface, listening closely. A faint sound drifted from the other side. A soft hum, a vibration, almost like breathing. Jorah. He stood there for a long time, his breath held in anticipation, unsure of what to expect. Then, as if by instinct, he spoke. "Jorah? Are you there?" At first, there was no answer. The seconds stretched on, becoming minutes, and Jace began to feel foolish for speaking at all. But then, he heard something. Soft, almost imperceptible. At first, a low growl, the sound of something stirring. His heart skipped a beat as the door to the cell slid open with a low creak. In the darkness beyond the door, he could barely make out the shape of Zora standing there, her immense form, partially obscured by the shadows. Her eyes gleamed in the dim light, glowing with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. For a moment, they both stood still, locked in a silent exchange. Jace was the first to break the silence. "What happened? Where are the guards?" Jorah's voice, when it came, was rough, strained. "They are gone," Temporarily. She paused, her enormous form shifting as if preparing for something. I have no idea how long they will be away, but it will not be long. Jace could feel his pulse quickening. This was exactly what he had been waiting for, but he also knew how dangerous this moment could be. The truth was, he didn't trust Zora. Not completely. The stories about her, the legends of destruction, of annihilation, had shaped everything. He knew. But he also knew that these were stories told by others, filtered through their fear and hatred. He had seen a different side of Zora, a side that no one else seemed to acknowledge. The side of her that was trapped, that was more than just the monster the universe had made her out to be. What do you want from me, Jace? Zora's voice was almost soft now, filled with a strange, vulnerable tone that threw Jace off balance. Why do you keep coming back? Why don't you fear me? The question hit him harder than he expected. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come right away. Fear was something he had lived with all his life. Fear of being seen, fear of being alone, and yes, even fear of the unknown. But when it came to Zora, fear felt different. It wasn't the gut-churning terror he had anticipated. It wasn't the fear of an unstoppable force or a mindless monster. It was something more profound, something that called to him, something that made him want to understand her, to see the soul that lay beneath the surface. Because I don't think you're what they say you are, Jace finally said, his voice steady, even though his heart pounded in his chest. I think there's more to you than they'll ever know. Zora's massive eyes narrowed as if considering his words. She stepped forward, closer to him, and Jace could feel the weight of her presence pressing down on him. The air between them seemed to thrum with energy, and for a moment, he felt as though the entire universe had narrowed down to this single point in time. You have no idea what I am, Jace, she murmured, her voice like a dark lullaby, heavy, with sorrow. You don't understand the things I've done, the things I've been forced to do. It's all I've known, all I've ever been. Jace looked up at her, his eyes searching hers, trying to see beyond the coldness, beyond the weight of the countless deaths she had caused. He saw something there, something that shook him to his core. It wasn't hatred, it wasn't even anger, it was something else. Something more raw, more fragile than he had ever expected. You don't have to be that anymore, he whispered, his words barely audible. You can be more than that. You can choose something else. Zora was silent for a long time, and Jace thought she might not respond at all. But then, her voice broke the silence, low and trembling with an emotion Jace couldn't quite place. I wish I could believe that, Jace. But how? After all I've done, how can I ever be anything? But the monster they say I am? Jace took a step closer, his heart in his throat. Because everyone deserves a chance to change, and that includes you. Zora's expression softened for a moment, the fierce warrior beneath the layers of terror and destruction slipping away, just enough for Jace to see the person beneath. The person who had been made a monster, but who still longed to be something more. For the first time, Jace truly believed that maybe, just maybe, he could help her. And in that moment, Zora believed. It too. Zora's massive form stood still, the room around her filled with an oppressive silence. Jace could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him, as if the very air around them had thickened. Her eyes, glowing faintly in the dim light, flickered. With uncertainty, a hint of something new and unfamiliar to Jace. He could sense that something had shifted between them. Something that had been dormant for so long had been awakened. Zora, once a terrifying legend feared across the galaxy, now seemed fragile, caught in a web of regret and unspoken desires. Jace stepped closer, his heart racing, but his mind clear. He had never imagined that he would be standing here, in the presence of such an ancient and dangerous being, speaking to her not as an enemy, but as someone who could understand. The monster, the killer, the fearsome warrior. She wasn't just those things. She was a being who had lived through untold horrors, a soul that had been shaped and warped by the world around her. And now, in this moment, Jace saw her not as the weapon others had made her into, but as someone who had lost their way, desperate for a path to redemption. "You're not a monster, Zora," Jace said, his voice low but steady. The words hung, in the air between them, thick with meaning. "You never were. You've just been forced into a role that's not yours. But you can change. I believe that." Jorah's eyes flickered, a sharp intake of breath escaping her lips as if she couldn't quite believe what he was saying. For so long, she had been told who she was, what she was meant to be. The creature of fear, the destroyer, the weapon of a ruthless empire. She had been bred for war, for destruction, and she had never known anything else. The very concept of change, of the possibility of another path, was foreign to her. It felt almost impossible, like a dream she dared not dream for fear of it shattering into nothing. For a long while, Zora remained silent, her expression unreadable. Her massive form shifted slightly, and Jace couldn't help but notice the small tremor in her hands that had once crushed entire civilizations, now trembling as if she feared what they might do if they acted on their own accord. It was a sign of something Jace hadn't expected: vulnerability. "I've done things," Zora finally whispered, her voice strained, heavy with the weight of years of violence. "Terrible things. I've killed. I've destroyed entire worlds. How can I ever undo that?" Jace's heart tightened, and for a moment he wasn't sure what to say. He had never been a warrior, never had the weight of so many deaths on his conscience. He couldn't even imagine the burden Zora must carry, the countless lives that had been snuffed out in her wake, the destruction of families, cities, entire civilizations. How could anyone ever come to terms with such a past? Yet somehow he knew there had to be a way for her to move beyond it, to find peace, or at least a path to it. No one was beyond redemption. "There's no undoing the past," Jace replied softly. "But that doesn't mean you can't choose to be different from now on. You don't have to keep running from what you've done. You can learn to live with it, learn to make things right, step by step." Zora's eyes bore into him, as if searching for any trace of insincerity, any hint that this was just another trick. She had been betrayed before, deceived into thinking there was a chance for something better, only to have those hopes crushed. But Jace wasn't like the others. His words weren't empty promises or manipulation. He wasn't here to control her or to bend her to some greater will. He was here because he saw something in her that no one else had ever seen, a flicker of hope, a longing for something more. For a brief moment, Jace thought he saw a tear glisten in her eye, but it was gone before he could be sure. Zora's expression softened, her immense shoulders slumping slightly, as if the weight of the years was starting to bear down on her in a way she hadn't allowed it to before. It was a subtle shift, one that could easily be missed, but it was there. The monster had shown a crack, a fracture in the armor that had once made her invincible. "I don't know if I can," she whispered, her voice trembling now, "but I want to try. For the first time in my life, I want to try." The words were barely audible, but they were enough to make Jace's heart swell with hope. He stepped forward, offering her the smallest smile, one that was filled with reassurance. There was no certainty in this. There was no guarantee that Zora could change, or that the galaxy would ever forgive her. But there was something more important than that. There was the possibility of change, the chance to choose a different future. Zora looked down at him, her immense figure casting a shadow over him, but there was no fear in his heart. Not anymore. She wasn't a monster. She was a being who had been shaped by the horrors of the galaxy. But she had the power to shape her own destiny now, and if Jace could help her, even in some small way, then he would do whatever it took. "I don't know how to start," Zora admitted, the vulnerability in her voice almost painful to hear. "I don't know how to fix everything I've broken." Jace smiled gently, his voice calm and steady. "One step at a time. We can figure it out together." The silence between them was different now. It wasn't filled with the weight of fear or suspicion. It was filled with the quiet understanding that something had changed. Jorah wasn't the monster she had once been, and Jace wasn't the person who had once feared her. They were two beings, each with their own history, their own pain, but bound by something deeper. A shared hope. A shared desire to find peace. For the first time, Zora allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have a future that wasn't defined by destruction. And Jace, the human who had seen through her outer shell, understood the soul beneath would be there to help her discover that future. Together, they would take the first steps into a new world, one where monsters could be redeemed and where even the most feared warrior could find the possibility of peace.